On March 15, 2025, Canada, America's largest energy supplier, made a seismic move. It halted its $13 billion oil and gas pipeline exports to the U.S., a decision that sent shockwaves through global markets. This wasn't a sudden tantrum, but a calculated response to years of escalating trade tensions. For decades, the U.S. has leaned heavily on Canada for 59% of its crude oil imports and 85% of its natural gas, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Now, with this critical supply line severed, gas prices have spiked by 22% in states like Michigan and New York, while electricity costs are up 15% nationwide, per Bloomberg data. Millions of Americans are feeling the pinch, from skyrocketing fuel bills to disruptions in public services. Why did Canada pull the trigger? The roots trace back to Washington's aggressive trade policies. Since 2020, the U.S. has slapped tariffs as high as 35% on Canadian goods, lumber, aluminum, and dairy, believing Ottawa wouldn't dare retaliate. "We underestimated Canada's resolve," admitted a senior U.S. trade official to Reuters. Canada had issued warnings for years, with Prime Minister Mark Carney stating in 2023, "Economic coercion will not dictate our sovereignty." Yet, Washington dismissed these signals, assuming geographic proximity guaranteed compliance. That miscalculation has now cost the U.S. dearly. Adding depth to the crisis, Canada's decision isn't just about oil, it's a strategic pivot. Ottawa has inked multi-billion-dollar energy deals with China and India, redirecting its exports to Asia's booming markets. According to the Wall Street Journal, these contracts span 15 years, ensuring Canada a foothold in the world's fastest-growing energy economies. This shift exposes a harsh reality. The U.S. is no longer Canada's only option. Canada is playing chess while the U.S. is stuck playing checkers, noted energy analyst Sarah Klein in a CNN Business interview. The move also aligns with Canada's broader goal to diversify trade, reducing reliance on a single market that accounts for 75% of its exports, per Statistics Canada. The ripple effects are immediate and brutal. In the U.S., industries dependent on cheap energy, manufacturing, transportation, and agriculture are reeling. The American Petroleum Institute warns that continued disruptions could shave 1.2% off GDP by Q2 2025. Meanwhile, Canada's bold strategy raises a critical question. Can the U.S. find a replacement supplier before the energy crisis spirals into an economic catastrophe? This isn't just a trade spat, it's a wake-up call. America's energy security hangs by a thread, and Canada just cut the cord. Canada's decision to halt its $13 billion energy exports to the U.S. in March 2025 isn't merely a bilateral feud, it's a tectonic shift in the global energy landscape. Ottawa has secured $20 billion in long-term contracts to supply oil, gas, and electricity to China, India, and Europe, according to Reuters. These deals, spanning over a decade, position Canada as a linchpin for energy-hungry economies. China, aiming to fuel its industrial surge, now receives 15% of Canada's crude oil output, while India has locked in 10% of its natural gas, per Bloomberg. Europe, desperate to replace Russian energy amid ongoing geopolitical tensions, has tapped Canada for 25% of its liquefied natural gas needs, as reported by the Wall Street Journal. This strategic pivot isn't just about new markets, it's a deliberate rewiring of global energy flows. Canada's export ports, once primarily feeding U.S. pipelines, are now reoriented toward Asia and Europe. The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, completed in 2024, now prioritizes shipments to China's coastal refineries, while LNG terminals in British Columbia are scaling up to serve India. Canada is no longer America's backyard supplier, it's a global player, said energy strategist Michael Tran in a CNN Business analysis. This shift has slashed the U.S. share of Canada's energy exports from 98% to under 40% in mere months, per Statistics Canada. For the U.S., the consequences are dire. Without Canada's supply, which powered 30% of U.S. refineries, states like New York, California, and Michigan face rolling blackouts as winter looms. Electricity prices have surged 18% in these regions, with the Energy Information Administration warning of potential grid failures during peak demand. Some utilities are now proposing peak-hour restrictions to prevent overloads, a move unseen since the 2000 California energy crisis. Major industries are buckling under the strain. General Motors and Ford have cut production shifts, citing 30% higher energy costs, while steelmakers like Nucor face profit margins shrinking by 12% per company filings. The food processing sector, heavily reliant on stable power, is scaling back, threatening 15,000 jobs nationwide, according to the USDA. The deeper wound is strategic. The U.S., once a dominant force in global energy markets, now scrambles to secure alternatives. Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, potential replacements, lack the infrastructure to match Canada's proximity and volume. America's energy independence is a myth exposed, warned economist Laura Peterson on Bloomberg TV. As Canada strengthens ties with Asia and Europe, the U.S. risks ceding its influence in international energy diplomacy, a blow that could reshape trade alliances for decades. Canada's new energy empire isn't just powering Asia and Europe, it's plunging the U.S. into an economic winter. As energy prices choke the U.S. economy, Trump's tariff gamble isn't just risky, it's pouring fuel on an already blazing crisis. By April 2025, America's energy crisis has morphed into a full-blown economic storm. With Canada's $13 billion oil and gas exports cut off, U.S. gas prices have soared 25%. Electricity costs have jumped 20%, and airline tickets are up 15%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Core inflation, now at 5.4% year-over-year per Federal Reserve data, is squeezing households and businesses alike. From grocery shelves to utility bills, Americans are grappling with a cost-of-living squeeze not seen since the 1970s. The U.S. energy grid, built on Canadian reliability, is on the verge of collapse, warned energy economist Daniel Yergin in a Wall Street Journal op-ed. Refineries in the Midwest, designed for Canada's heavy crude, are operating at 60% capacity, driving up fuel costs for millions. The root cause? A trade war gone nuclear. For years, the U.S. imposed tariffs on Canadian goods, 25% on lumber, 10% on dairy, expecting no pushback. Canada's retaliation, slashing its energy lifeline, has exposed Washington's miscalculation. Now, a $19 billion trade agreement for auto parts and energy cooperation teeters on collapse, per Bloomberg. Former President Donald Trump, seizing the moment, escalated tensions on April 10, 2025, threatening a 100% tariff on Canada's $400 billion auto industry. Speaking on Fox News, he declared, "If Canada doesn't play ball, their cars won't cross our border." This sector, employing 120,000 Canadians and supplying 60% of U.S. vehicle parts, is a linchpin of cross-border trade, according to the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. Canada's response was swift and defiant. Prime Minister Mark Carney, addressing Parliament, stated, "We will not bow to economic blackmail." Ottawa is now exploring tariffs of its own, targeting U.S. exports like agricultural machinery and pharmaceuticals, which could cost American firms $10 billion annually, per Reuters estimates. Analysts warn this tit-for-tat could spiral into a broader trade war, with Goldman Sachs projecting a 0.8% hit to U.S. GDP by mid-2026 if unresolved. Meanwhile, Europe is quietly reshaping the global stage. On April 8, 2025, the EU unveiled its $800 billion Rearm Europe program, aimed at boosting weapons production and reducing reliance on U.S. defense, as reported by CNN Business. Europe is no longer content playing second fiddle, said NATO analyst Emma Dubois. With Canada redirecting energy to Europe and Asia, and the EU flexing its military muscle, the U.S. risks losing its once unquestioned dominance in the Western alliance. Is Washington's leadership unraveling as allies chart their own paths? Trump's tariffs may ignite headlines, but they're burning bridges with allies, and America's economy is paying the price. When allies like Canada start eyeing the exit, it's not just a trade war, it's a crisis of trust in America's global dominance. On April 10, 2025, the U.S.-Canada rift exploded into a geopolitical flashpoint. Former President Donald Trump, in a fiery Fox News interview, threatened a 100% tariff on Canada's $400 billion auto industry, which supplies 60% of U.S. vehicle components per the U.S. International Trade Commission. His ultimatum? Stop migrants crossing the northern border or face economic ruin. They're letting thousands pour in, Trump claimed, despite Border Patrol data showing only 2,500 apprehensions in 2024, a fraction of southern border figures. This aggressive move risks crippling an integrated supply chain that supports 2 million jobs across both nations, according to the Center for Automotive Research. Canada's response was unyielding. Prime Minister Mark Carney, in a televised address, declared, "No tariff will break our sovereignty." Rejecting Trump's rhetoric, including past suggestions of Canada becoming America's 51st state, Carney signaled a bold shift. Ottawa announced a review of its $19 billion contract for 88 F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin, with the first 16 already ordered. "We're reassessing our reliance on U.S. defense," a Canadian defense official told Reuters. This pivot isn't isolated. Portugal, another NATO ally, canceled its F-35 order on April 9th, citing unstable U.S. foreign policy, per Defense News. Two NATO members stepping back simultaneously underscores a growing distrust in Washington's leadership, with the Atlantic Council warning of a fracturing Western alliance. Canada's alternative? The Swedish Saab Gripen E, a fighter jet prized for its $85 million price tag, half the F-35's cost, and ability to operate in Arctic conditions, critical for Canada's vast northern frontier. Equipped with the Meteor missile, boasting a 120-mile range, the Gripen offers strategic flexibility. This isn't just about jets, it's Canada asserting military independence, said defense analyst Rachel Cohen in a CNN business report. Sweden's neutral stance also aligns with Canada's push to diversify partnerships beyond the U.S., a trend reinforced by new trade talks with the EU and Japan, per Bloomberg. The stakes are high. A disrupted F-35 program could delay NATO's air modernization, weakening collective defense as Russia and China expand their influence. Meanwhile, Trump's tariff threats risk escalating into a broader economic conflict, with Goldman Sachs estimating a $15 billion hit to U.S. auto exports if Canada retaliates. As allies question America's reliability, the question looms: can the U.S. salvage its leadership before the West's unity unravels? Canada's not just buying jets elsewhere, it's buying time to break free from America's shadow. While Canada builds its own arsenal and Europe rearms, the U.S. is watching its allies slip toward independence. As the U.S.-Canada trade war intensifies, Ottawa is doubling down on military self-reliance, signaling a seismic shift in North American security dynamics. By April 2025, Canada's review of its $19 billion F-35 contract has spotlighted the Swedish Saab Gripen E as a frontrunner. Priced at $85 million per unit versus the F-35's $175 million, the Gripen offers low maintenance costs and unmatched Arctic operability, critical for patrolling Canada's 5.5 million square miles of northern territory. Its Meteor missile, with a 120-mile range, outclasses most NATO equivalents, per Jane's Defense Weekly. The Gripen isn't just a jet, it's Canada's declaration of strategic autonomy, said defense strategist Paul Mitchell in a CNN business interview. This pivot is backed by a booming domestic defense sector, generating $9.8 billion annually and employing 64,000. Canada's industry is a powerhouse, per the Canadian Defense Industry Association. General Dynamics Land Systems produces LAV-6 armored vehicles, with 70% exported globally. CAE leads in flight simulation, training pilots for 20 NATO air forces, while Magellan Aerospace develops satellite components for NASA and ESA missions, according to Bloomberg. These firms are now prioritizing non-U.S. markets, with exports to Europe and Asia up 25% since 2024, Statistics Canada reports. Canada's military buildup extends beyond jets. Ottawa has committed $7 billion for 16 Boeing P-8A Poseidon aircraft to replace its aging CP-140 fleet, enhancing maritime surveillance amid Arctic resource disputes. A $4 billion deal for 11 MQ-9B Sky Guardian UAVs bolsters border and remote monitoring, while a $2 billion contract with Germany ensures Canada's Leopard 2 tanks remain combat-ready through 2035, per Reuters. Canada is preparing for a multipolar world where the U.S. isn't the only sheriff, noted geopolitical analyst Sarah Klein on Bloomberg TV. Across the Atlantic, the EU is rewriting its own script. On April 8, 2025, the $800 billion Rearm Europe program was launched to turbocharge weapons production and slash reliance on U.S. defense, as reported by the Wall Street Journal. Rheinmetall's CEO, Armin Paperger, told CNBC that EU defense spending could hit $1 trillion by 2030, fueled by new factories for tanks, drones, and missiles. This ambition reflects Europe's frustration with U.S. unpredictability, with France and Germany pushing for a unified EU army by 2035, per EU Commission leaks. As Canada and Europe forge independent paths, the U.S. risks becoming a bystander in a reordered global security landscape. Canada's jets and Europe's tanks aren't just weapons, they're a warning. The West's old guard is charting a future without Washington. When Trump toys with abandoning NATO, he's not just rattling allies, he's risking America's global supremacy. In April 2025, the Western alliance faces its gravest test yet. The European Union's $800 billion Rearm Europe program, unveiled on April 8, signals a bold bid for military independence. Designed to ramp up production of tanks, drones, and missiles, the initiative aims to cut Europe's reliance on U.S. defense by 40% by 2030, per the Wall Street Journal. Rheinmetall's CEO, Armin Paperger, told Reuters that 200 new factories are planned across the EU, creating 150,000 jobs and boosting local economies. This isn't just about weapons. It's Europe asserting itself as a standalone power, with France and Germany eyeing a unified EU military command, according to a leaked EU Commission report. Across the Atlantic, former President Donald Trump is pouring gasoline on the fire. In a chaotic White House press conference on April 11, 2025, he stunned allies by threatening to pull the U.S. out of NATO. Questioning the alliance's commitment, Trump dismissed NATO's invocation of Article 5 after 9/11 when allies rallied to support the U.S. "If we're in trouble, will France show up? I'm not so sure," he scoffed, ignoring NATO's 20-year Afghanistan deployment alongside U.S. forces. He doubled down, insisting that countries failing to meet NATO's 2% GDP defense spending target, currently 11 of 31 members, per NATO's 2024 report, would be left to fend for themselves. "If you don't pay, we won't defend. It's common sense," Trump declared. This rhetoric isn't just posturing, it's destabilizing. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warned in a CNN business interview that undermining collective defense invites aggression from Russia and China. The alliance, which accounts for 50% of global military spending, hinges on U.S. leadership, contributing $860 billion annually, per SIPRI data. Trump's threats risk fracturing this unity, pushing allies like Canada and Portugal to diversify defense partnerships, as seen in their F-35 pullbacks. Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs projects a 1% drag on U.S. GDP if NATO trade ties weaken, citing disrupted defense contracts worth $200 billion. As Europe rearms and Trump alienates allies, the U.S. faces a stark reality. Its once ironclad influence is eroding. Can Washington rebuild trust before the West's security framework collapses? Trump's gamble isn't just shaking NATO, It's shaking the foundations of America's global power. When Trump swings from tariffs to concessions and back, it's not strategy. It's a wrecking ball to America's economy. In April 2025, former President Donald Trump's erratic trade policies are plunging the U.S. economy into deeper uncertainty. On April 11th, during a heated White House press conference, Trump defended his approach, insisting that inflation, now at 5.4% year-over-year per the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is temporary, and that farmers will come out stronger. Yet agricultural exports to Canada, worth $27 billion annually, have dropped 15% since Ottawa's retaliatory tariffs, according to the USDA. Farmers aren't winning. They're bleeding, said Iowa grower Mark Thompson in a Reuters interview, as corn and soybean prices stagnate amid trade disruptions. In a stunning reversal, Trump announced a one-month suspension of tariffs on select Canadian and Mexican imports, effective April 12, 2025, covering $10 billion in goods like steel and auto parts, per Bloomberg. The move, aimed at pressuring both nations on immigration and fentanyl smuggling, comes after Canada's energy export cutoff and Mexico's threat to hike tariffs on U.S. corn and wheat. "This is a short-term deal," Trump declared, warning Ottawa and Mexico City not to seek extensions beyond April 2, 2025. "Don't come back to me after that. I won't listen." But this flip-flop, following months of aggressive tariff hikes, has left businesses reeling. The National Association of Manufacturers reports that 60% of its members are delaying investments due to policy whiplash. The inconsistency is costly. Goldman Sachs estimates that Trump's tariff reversals could add $5 billion in compliance costs for U.S. firms, as supply chains scramble to adapt. The Port of Detroit, handling 40% of U.S.-Canada trade, saw a 10% drop in cargo volume last week, per Port Authority data, as importers hedge against policy shifts. One day it's tariffs, the next it's concessions. How do you plan for that? Asked supply chain expert Laura Chen on CNN Business. Meanwhile, Mexico's finance minister, Rogelio Ramirez, signaled openness to talks, but warned of reciprocal measures if Trump reinstates tariffs, per the Wall Street Journal. As businesses brace for more volatility, Trump's gamble risks alienating allies and destabilizing trade, worth $1.2 trillion annually. Can the U.S. economy withstand another round of policy chaos, or is a deeper crisis looming? Trump's tariff roulette isn't outsmarting Canada or Mexico, it's outsmarting America's own economy. As Trump's controversies pile up and markets tank, America's economic stability is hanging by a thread. On April 11, 2025, former President Donald Trump's White House press conference turned into a lightning rod for controversy, deepening America's economic woes. Amid soaring inflation and energy prices, Trump signed a proclamation for Women's History Month, touting his administration's tremendous support for women. The claim rang hollow against his well-documented history, including multiple allegations of sexual misconduct and a 2005 Access Hollywood tape where he boasted about groping women, resurfaced by CNN. "It's a jarring disconnect," said political analyst Rachel Cohen on Bloomberg TV, noting that public trust in Trump's leadership has dipped to 38%, per a Gallup poll. More alarming was Trump's announcement that Elon Musk would spearhead a sweeping overhaul of federal agencies, targeting layoffs that could slash 500,000 jobs, according to a leaked OMB memo cited by Reuters. Veteran services, Social Security Administration, and infrastructure projects like highway repairs face cuts, threatening benefits for 22 million veterans and 70 million retirees, per VA and SSA data. "This isn't efficiency. It's gutting the safety net," warned economist Paul Krugman in a Wall Street Journal op-ed. Musk's involvement, tied to his $250 billion fortune, has sparked fears of privatizing public services, with Tesla's stock oddly spiking 4% amid the news, per NASDAQ filings. The fallout was swift. On April 12th, the Dow Jones cratered 850 points, a 2.1% plunge, while the NASDAQ slid 3.1%, erasing $1.2 trillion in market value, per Bloomberg. Trump's tariff flip-flops. Hiking, then pausing duties on Canada and Mexico, fueled the chaos, with 65% of CFOs citing policy uncertainty as their top concern, according to a Deloitte survey. Even Fox News, once a staunch ally, turned critical. Anchor Neil Cavuto questioned, "How do tariffs help when American consumers pay the price?" A nod to a Peterson Institute study showing 90% of tariff costs hit U.S. businesses and households. As markets reel and layoffs loom, Trump's leadership is under fire. With consumer confidence at a 20-month low, per the Conference Board, the question isn't just about recovery, it's whether the U.S. can avoid a full-blown recession. Trump's policies aren't draining the swamp, they're sinking the economy. As stocks crash and prices soar, Trump's tariff crusade isn't saving America. It's pushing it toward the economic brink. On April 12, 2025, Wall Street suffered a brutal reckoning. The Dow Jones plummeted 850 points, a 2.1% nosedive, marking one of 2025's darkest trading days. The S&P 500 shed 2.3%, and the Nasdaq cratered 3.1%, wiping out $1.5 trillion in market value, per Bloomberg. The trigger? Former President Donald Trump's chaotic tariff policies, which he insists will bring jobs home. Yet the data tells a different story. Manufacturing job growth has stalled at 0.2% since January, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, while supply chain disruptions cost firms $8 billion monthly, per Goldman Sachs. Tech giants bore the brunt. Apple's shares fell 5.6%, driven by fears of pricier Chinese imports, while Tesla dropped 4.8% as battery material costs spiked, per Nasdaq filings. Retail behemoth Walmart warned of imminent price hikes, projecting a 10% increase on electronics and apparel by Q3, directly hitting consumers' wallets, as reported by Reuters. "Tariffs aren't protecting us, they're punishing us," said retail analyst Sarah Klein on CNN Business, echoing a 2024 Moody's study that linked tariffs to 90% of recent grocery price surges. Even Trump's media allies are turning. At a White House briefing, Fox News reporter Neil Cavuto grilled Trump's spokeswoman Carolyn Leavitt, asking, "Have you ever paid a tariff?" Leavitt's claim that tariffs are a tax cut unraveled against hard evidence. The American Enterprise Institute reports 98% of U.S. tariffs on China, $80 billion annually, are absorbed by American businesses and consumers. Import prices have surged 17% since Trump's latest duties, fueling core inflation to 5.2% year-over-year, per Federal Reserve data. Leavitt's flustered response, "You're insulting my economic knowledge," drew scorn, with the Wall Street Journal calling it a masterclass in denial. The broader outlook is grim. J.P. Morgan Chase now pegs the odds of a 2025 recession at 70%, citing tariff-induced uncertainty. Small businesses, facing 20% higher input costs, are cutting jobs at the fastest rate since 2020, per the National Federation of Independent Business. As consumer confidence tanks to a 22-month low, per the Conference Board, Trump's policies are no longer rallying the base. They're rattling the nation's economic foundation. Trump's tariffs aren't a shield for America, they're a sledgehammer smashing its prosperity.